If you have to ask me any questions, what I would suggest is basically just you can use the chat icon, and when you click, how will the chat come? If you click this particular icon, it will show you a participant list, and when you click on the participant, any particular participant, you can actually send a chat, right? So you can ask me questions there. The other way that would be that if I kind of mute everyone else when I'm doing the presentation, but that would mean that I'm the only one who's speaking and I'm not able to hear you. So rather than me do that, the other option would be, in some cases, if you see these three circles on my screen, so is the one which is you, what you do is you just mute that like this. Just click on it and Wellington is muted. So when you want to say something, just unmute. Okay? Either way, it's not a problem. But just going into, the specifics of what we've done so far. As you know that we have just quickly recapping, we are covering unit 5.3, which is managing people or people management. In this particular unit, we have covered a few learning outcomes, and we've gone back and forth in terms of, looking at sort of the key bits and pieces of how you look at managing people in an organization, or how do you manage your staff or employees within a business. Now, this is a key part because when you move up in your career or in your jobs, at some stage you have supervisory responsibility or responsibility to manage people or staff within the department, within the company, the strategic business unit, whatever you call it. And at that stage, you should be equipped with the tools and techniques to be able to do things which will help your team work effectively, understand what kind of a structure needs to be put in, make sure that the structure in which you kind of, when you structure the organization, you are able to get the maximum productivity or effectiveness from your staff in terms of completing the task. And as a manager or as a person who manages or supervises your staff, you should have the ability to be able to manage, behaviors, expectation, attitudes, and in some cases, you're required to show leadership positions. That means you're able to act as a leader and set an example, act, first, and so that the others can follow. So literally speaking, what we've done so far in the unit is what we've done. We've gone through in a structured manner, understanding the various structures, functional, matrix, hierarchical, department, formal structures. Then we've looked at how these structures affect and help you shape the culture of an organization. So sometimes you will see that you have different leadership styles and management styles. And if you have a democratic management style, you will normally see a structure within the organization which will be, either functional or, hierarchical or flat. Rather than hierarchical, it will be functional or flat. So similarly, what we should be able to do is, depending on the size and the number of people you manage or the size of the organization, you should be able to kind of look at the concept of understanding what structure is to be put in. And once you put in the structure, you should be able to then manage your staff effectively. In the last session, what we looked at was we looked at the application of motivation theories. So when you have organization, when you work within an organization, you have some sort of a structure, you work within a department, there is some reporting, there is some, some sort of a hierarchy within the department. If you manage peers or colleagues, then in that case, if you're in a managerial position, you understand behaviors, attitudes, and then you put together a team working, which or a style of leadership which actually effectively promotes team working. And then when you are working within the team as a manager or as a supervisor, you then need to look at tools and techniques that you need to know of how to ensure that there is enough motivation, enough passion, enough enthusiasm within the team to be able to do the job, to accomplish the tasks and goals. So what we looked at in the last session was look at things like we have studied motivation stories, we've studied leadership styles, but we looked at the application of the motivation theories and leadership styles in the last session. We looked at very briefly only the we only looked at very briefly one of the key motivation factors or steps which managers take within the organization is to help their staff go on training and development. So if you spot gap areas, if you spot gaps in skills, then in those cases, you put your staff into training and development, which could be seen as an incentive, which could be seen as as an indicator that the organization, wants you and wants to develop you into a leader or into a future manager, and that is seen as a technique to motivate staff. Apart from that, there were other things that we looked at, which is terms of job enlargement, job rotation, and to a certain extent, we looked at rewards and incentives, which are put together by managers from time to time to be able to motivate their team and keep them working. Now, there were two handouts which I sent out in the email. One was basically something that we were not able to cover, but it is one of the things that you need to look at is what is the difference between coaching and mentoring. And that is a bit of a concept wherein when we look at coaching and mentoring, what we are looking at is at some stage, when you reach a particular position wherein you have a number of years of experience, you're working well, sometimes organizations put you into a position wherein you are supposed to coach your staff. That means they put you into a position wherein you kind of work very, because of your seniority, you're able to work in a position wherein you are given responsibility to manage staff, and that management of staff is essentially done from an angle of helping you develop further to move into a management or a senior management position. But at the same point in time, before you move out of your role, you are supposed to kind of coach and mentor a person to be able to take up that position before it becomes, before you actually move out and it becomes vacant. So that was a handout which I had sent. I'd really not taken that up on the discussions, but it's something that if you've gone through and if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take up those questions in this session, and then we can go further. And today, what we are looking at is just summarizing in terms of the unit. What we are looking at is understanding when you go from that particular structure of application of motivation theories, managing staff, you need to at some stage look at reviews. How do you look at doing reviews? When I say reviews should kind of ring a bell, like or think of words like performance appraisal, 360-degree feedback, balanced scorecard, which is a technique or a tool that is used by managers to review performance or evaluate performance of employees over the course of the last financial year. So those kind of things are what we are going to look at studying in this last learning outcome of people management, so that at some stage when you're able to manage, coach, and also effectively lead the staff, what are the tools and techniques used by HR managers, by people in managerial positions or management positions to be able to manage people, review their performance, is what we are going to look at today in terms of today's session. Now, any questions on the previous session? Philip, specifically you, because I think Wellington would have, I'll ask him a bit later because he would have gone through some of the handouts that I sent.
No questions yet, no.
No questions yet, okay. Wellington, did you manage to go through the handouts sent on the email? He's muted the speaker. One second. Wellington? Can you hear me, Wellington? Hello? Wellington, are you there?
Hello. Go ahead.
Okay. Did you manage to go through, the handouts that I sent on the email?
The one you mean the first one you need to submit or what?
No. The learning outcome 4 of people management.
Yes.
So, did you have any questions that you want to check on that?
We know the. I can't see too small.
Looking at the learning outcome 4 for unit 5.3, managing people, people management.
I don't have that one. I don't have. Is it 4?
Yes, it is unit 5.3, people management.
5.3. Yes, 1 and 2. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you get my?
If 3 have.
Did you get this email?
Yes, I have 3. 4.
Okay. The 4, okay. And did you manage to go through this? Did you go through this last time? Because no, you were not in this.
Yes, this one I have got it. Yes, I have this one.
Okay. Did you manage to go through, read through this handout or presentations which I sent?
No.
All right. Okay. So my suggestion is, obviously we are doing the last session, but I'm going to try and send you the recording and some handouts which you can access, so that at some stage what my suggestion to you would be to go through them, and if you have any questions, then you could discuss at a later stage. Okay.
Okay.
Now, so looking at the learning outcome 5, let's briefly look at a few slides, which I've kind of put together for covering some of the tasks which are in terms of how do you review people, or how do you manage people. When you manage people, how do you do their appraisals or their reviews within the organization? Now, one of the key things that we will look at is a term that you should have come across, or you will come across as you study further, and also it is a common term which is used in most businesses and organizations, which is called performance management. Now, the reason why it is called, why do we look at performance management? Every year, you will imagine a situation that you work within an organization. Every year, the organization, you expect that the organization, you do some work, you're given some job responsibility, you try and accomplish those tasks to the best of your ability. And because in the times that we live, the cost of living keeps going up. So every year, our expectation is we also should get some sort of a rise in our wages or in our salaries. And when you look at that, at some stage, the employers look at doing something called performance review, or they do a review of how you're fared against the jobs or tasks which have been given to you across the week, month, and across the year. Correct?
Yeah.
When you look at let's look at a simple example. You give somebody a job. You ask somebody to do a job for you, and let me give you an example here. So, for example, you bought a new television, and PCs and currywurls are coming in to install the TV. Now, you've already made the payment of the television that you bought at the store, but when they come in and install, you're supposed to pay them some installation charges as well. Now, when they come into your house, obviously you receive the delivery, you let them in, and you say, okay, I want the TV to be put up on the wall. Now, depending on how they conduct themselves and how they are able to install by taking instructions from you, and how quickly are they able to install, how effectively they are able to install, so that they make less mess in as far as your living room is concerned. There's less and less breakage. They're looking like to be doing a very professional job. So what you do towards the end is either you give them a compliment, or you have a discussion saying that I don't think this has been done right. We need this and this to be looked into before I can make you the payment, or give you the charges which you're asking for installation. The reason you do that is because you're expecting, when you're paying for a product or a service, you're expecting that service to be received. You're expecting a certain quality of service to be received. So normally in such cases, what they do is that when you order something, they come in, they will neatly tuck away all the packing, take the packaging away, and then make sure that everything is neat and tidy, and it's been installed as per the expectation of the customer. Before they leave, they try and give you a small demonstration of how things would work or what you need to configure. So the engineer might ask you, do you have a skybox, or do you have an additional speaker or a home theater system to connect? And if you have those peripherals and the relevant cables, you give it to them, they configure it, and then they, obviously towards the end, once they've finished, they ask you to sign an installation note, and then you make the payment or something like that. And what you're doing in the whole process of sitting back and observing when they're installing is the process of reviewing their performance. That means this is what you had asked for, and this is what you expect from a company like PCs and Curries and PCs World, and this is what they've done, And when you evaluate, you fill up a feedback form, sign the installation note, obviously pay them the fees, and because the work has been done to your expectation, you're happy with the work delivered. At this stage, you give them an excellent feedback. Imagine that situation of you buying a product, but at the same point in time, imagine the situation of putting yourself in their shoes wherein you are working within an organization. You have a job description, you're supposed to do certain relevant jobs, and then towards the end of the year, you expect some sort of an appraisal to happen, and that appraisal, if it goes well and they feel that you've come across on your responsibilities very well, you've managed to meet or exceed the targets which have been set, and if the company and the management are happy with the performance, you are up for a bonus, or you are up for some sort of an incentive or a reward. Have you come across a situation, or have you seen this happening?
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially, it's true. I've seen that.
Right. So even if you're working, say for example, sometimes if you're working within an organization, let's look at frontline retail, or a financial services sector. If you're working the frontline roles, if you're able to service customers or manage them quite well, towards the end of the day or the end of the month, when you have your appraisals or have your reviews, your GM or your manager would basically say that, okay, this month you've done exceedingly well, and blah blah blah, you could have an employee of the month, or some sort of a recognition which is given. Now all this is something which is evaluated using something called performance management. And if this is done as a process within the organization, whether it's monthly, in some cases, in some organizations, it is done on a daily basis. So when you are in entry-level roles, or at the frontline roles of any job, for example, if you work within an office at the reception, or in the in the customer services department, this review could happen daily. How many customers did you serve, or what was the outcome? It happens in a weekly, monthly, quarterly, and even on an annual basis. So for people who are in the management position, it might happen, or when you're working within an organization, normally happens on a monthly basis, and a quarterly or yearly basis. But in some organization, it can also be on a daily basis. Like if you look at the accounts department, the managing director might come and ask, if the account department has a debt collection manager, the person might be asked to produce a report on a daily basis saying that how much of the debt has been collected. In some of the companies which are debt collection companies, or when we look at organizations which are into the collection of debt on behalf of third party, and they're hired on behalf of third party organizations, then you will see that their evaluation happens on a daily basis. And the success of that collection determines what the fees, management fees, the company would charge. So if this as a process is happening within organizations, and it is a structured process which happens on weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly basis, it is so-called, it is the process of performance management. And you are managed on the performance on the basis of your job description. I don't know whether you recall, but last time when we covered the JCM cycle, job characteristic cycle that we looked at, job characteristic model, JCM, we looked at understanding that at some stage, when you work within the organization and the interviews are happening, you are recruited on the basis of your skills, your background experience, how passionate or enthusiastic are you in your role, how autonomous can you be in your role, and at some stage, how do you take feedback? You recall this, Philip?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. So when you look at that concept of JCM, which is job characteristic model, and if we look at some stage giving you a job description, and this is your role that you need to do, this is where your work starts and finishes. At the end of the year, the cycle through which your performance is managed or is evaluated is something called the performance management cycle. So here, what normally would happen is in your job, in your job description, you will have something which will be spoken about, which is called some sort of objectives set, qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative could be in the case if you are in an administration back-end role, or quantitative if you are in a frontline role like sales, marketing, business development, or finance. You're allocated some targets, and the targets are reviewed on a monthly basis, and then in some cases on an annual basis. And the whole team, if it's the sales team or if it's the financial, accounts team, or if it's the production team, the entire team undergoes some sort of a review. But in that review, the managers would end up reviewing their, team members, and they will then represent in terms of a review of the team, which is going to be done by the top management, and that will happen at their level. And this process is something called performance management cycle. Now, every time you're given something in terms of a task to do or a job to accomplish, you always ask questions. And in most organizations and businesses, when jobs or targets are set within a job role, when targets are set, we tend to follow the term, or these targets are meant to be something called SMART targets. Now, the reason why we use this term or this acronym SMART is because they stand for being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and they need to be time bound. Right? Have you set SMART targets? Have you seen even SMART targets being set or heard about this term?
Yes.
Yeah. So very good. So if you are in a particular situation, what typically tends to happen is if you've been given a job, you always ask a few set of questions, and these set of questions are supposed to seek clarification in terms of what is to be done. An example that I would give here is that when we look at our own course, and we are running this course, and we have a few learners who are studying at this moment, the idea is from a teacher's perspective, you want to be able to set some sort of a SMART target. That means when we complete a unit, you should be able to achieve it. So it is a very specific target that when we complete unit in 4 or 5 weeks, we are expecting an assignment to come in 2 weeks. So the specific target is that your assignment for that unit needs to be drafted in the next 2 weeks when the unit finishes. It is measurable because the assessment criteria against which we are going to evaluate is already defined by the awarding organization. They are achievable because we give you some guidance in terms of how to be able to do the assignment. There is some indicative content, unit specification sheet, PowerPoint presentations, all the resources for you to be able to create and present a first draft is provided. That is why they are said. That is why I would say fairly that it is achievable in 2 weeks once the unit is completed. It is relevant because you're expecting, as a teacher, I'm expecting that we will receive relevant content in the assignment because the teaching has been done, which is definitely pertaining to what has been asked for, and what is related to the indicative content, and the key concepts have been covered. And the reason of time bound is because we want the assignment to come in after after the unit is completed, so that while the content is fresh and you are aware and you are able to recall, it is best to finish the assignment at that point in time rather than to delay it, because if you leave it for a couple of weeks, then in some cases what tends to happen is because you're involved with a lot of other things, you might tend to forget what has been delivered or what has been taught. So while it is fresh, we will set a timeline saying that, okay, we've just about covered the unit, so let's get a first draft coming across to us in the next 2 weeks. So similarly, most managers normally would agree today targets with their employees, whether it's qualitative, quantitative targets, or targets which are related to the job description, set when they hire you as a staff, and they are set on the basis of something called SMART. That means I don't want to give a target to a sales manager saying that, can you achieve 5 million in sales in the next 6 months? Whereas I know clearly that the organization has not had a turnover of 5 million in the last 10 years. So I'm being unrealistic. What you set is realistic targets which are achievable. And these realistic targets which are achievable, they have to be specific. They have to have a specific result or an outcome because of which, the person who is accepting that particular task is able to feel that these tasks have been set rationally, and there is, if given the right amount of support in terms of achieving those sales targets, they can be achieved. So this is a term which comes across when we review performance, because when a manager sits down with the employee, or when you sit down with the staff, what you tend to do is you tend to agree on a specific target. And the agreement can happen around something which is smart. That means it is something which is specific, it is measurable. That means it is achievable at the end of the year or at the end of the month, depending on the time frame being discussed, and they are relevant to the organizational goals and objectives. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I've got some, notes which are primarily, on the slide notes, which you can probably read once you get some of these slides. Now, one of the key things, the whole idea of doing, performance management is basically to look at reviewing your people. You want to find out areas of gaps. You want to find out, skills which need to be developed. And at some stage, what you want to be able to do is have these, reviews which will help you establish whether this particular person is fit for this role or not. And these appraisals typically happen when you see, say for example, you take on a new staff or a new member of staff in the organization, and that is where organization puts some sort of a probation period. That means or a trial period. So you are going to be on trial for 4 weeks. You want to actually see what has been claimed on the CV or in terms of experience, that it is absolutely which is working. And once you are sure in that particular context, what you tend to do is then offer the staff the permanent employment or a full-time contract. So appraisals are looked at in very different ways, and some of the reasons why we look at appraisals is at some stage also try and understand the appraisal route, that what are the problems the staffs or the employees are encountering, and what these problems could lead to in terms of for future perspective. So sometimes you will see that people will come in the appraisal and also have a list of their own complaints or a list of their own reasons of why they were not able to meet the performance or achieve the target set. So it could be things like, that the company did not provide me, say for example, X, Y, Z things, or in some cases you will get to see that the staff would end up making, giving reasons, not making excuses, but giving reasons which at some stage you will feel are pertinent because it could hamper the performance or could have hindered the performance of the employee. So appraisals are a method to review performance. They are a qualitative measure because this is something that you have a discussion with. Normally most organizations will ask you to go away, fill up a format in terms of your annual review, and they'll ask you to highlight maybe 2 or 3 things which you have done quite well, areas wherein you need support or guidance or development, and then last but not the least, what are the resources required for you to be able to effectively do your job in the new financial year or in the new year. So these things have to be looked at, and you need to know clearly how to conduct a performance appraisal, how you are going to go about agreeing targets which are going to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Because at some stage, you are also going to be having your own targets, or you're going to be managed by a person senior to you in the management, and they will also expect these targets to be met. Or if you're managing a team, they will expect you to manage your team effectively, so that at some stage, the goals and objectives set by the management are something that you're able to meet. So sometimes you also get to see in the organizations is that there are reviews which are done, specifically in the sales organization, specifically in the services sector, specifically in the financial sector, or in the production sector. You will see that there are reviews which happen on a weekly, monthly basis. The reason why it happens is in production organizations, they do not want the quality to slip. So reviews on quality are done, or checks and balances are maintained, so that the quality in terms of output is not compromised. In the case of sales organizations, it is done on a weekly basis, daily weekly basis, is because they want to make sure that there are no surprises towards the end of the month. So if there's a target of £1 million which has been set for sales, at the end of the month, the management does not want to see a surprise that, okay, we only achieved 200K. So what they tend to do is they do these appraisals or performance management on a daily, weekly basis. So depending on the department and the organization that you're working in, these appraisals, which is in terms of performance management, can have varying time and frequency. So here, what we want to be able to look at is, let's look at a particular example in terms of how. Before I go into this, there are other approaches which employers look at when they do appraisals and when they do reviews. And these approaches which they look at are all done from an angle of understanding how they will basically promote, improvement within the organization. So the main idea of doing these, reviews is to basically make sure that the reviews lead to more productivity and efficiency within the organization amongst the employees. They should be closer working within the team, and most of the team or most of the members working within the team then should be able to follow the rules and regulation laid down by the organization to achieve maximum productivity. So let's look at a situation wherein it's a small task. Let me, put that forward. Now, when we look at the broad term of appraisal or performance management, what else are the ways or means that you can think of that the organization would look at managing, or reviewing the performance of the employees in the organization? Think of it within your own organizations. How do you think your manager looks at doing your review or looks at reviewing your performance? How do they do it? Can you think of how they do it?
One-to-ones, catch-up meetings.
One-to-one, yes. What else?
Sometimes organizing the trainings, it can be.
Sorry, LinkedIn, come again.
I'm saying organizing the trainings, like PD trainings.
Okay, that could be one. Yes. What else? Think of it from like Philip is sort of it from a point of view of your manager. So, for example, one-on-ones, sometimes they will approach you and say, okay, I need to have a discussion with you because, and then this is one-on-one because they want to review only, your performance, or they want to only look at reviewing something which you are working on directly. What could be the other areas of looking at, performance management? Within your organization.
They could set some targets.
Come again, sorry, Philip?
They can set some targets, like manager can set targets so that to see if you can reach the criteria.
That's correct. So typically in such a situation, when the review or when they come in and have that discussion with you, which sounds or feels like a review happening, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be listing out activities and goals and saying, okay, you've done this, you've done that. When are you completing this? When do you expect to complete this? So that's absolutely fine. Yes.
Appraisals, all those things, I think.
Yeah, appraisals, yes. So appraisals typically tend to happen on a monthly, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly basis. And appraisals would be a formal process of review, wherein every aspect of your performance is going to be reviewed. Things like, sometimes in some organizations you even see, timeliness in terms of you coming into the office, or obviously being on time for work is also looked at. They also look at number of hours that you and things like that. So they review everything. Your performance at some stage, your other areas of working within the organization, within the team, everything else is reviewed. Yes. What else can you think? So if you look at even before this performance, or the discussion between the start. So even before this discussion begins to start, what we tend to see is that there are some steps which your manager or your supervisor would do is basically discuss with you that let's have a formal meeting and in that formal meeting, they send out a particular form of agenda, and that agenda would say, okay, we are looking at, asking you to present 1, 2, 3, 4 things, which could mean that you will have to dig back and see, what has been given, what was accomplished, and, you try and then look at the whole situation from a point of view of you're presenting that what things you've achieved, what things you've not been able to achieve, and the achievement, if that achievement that you have done has kind of happened because of non-availability of resources, or say for example, non-availability of participation from other team members, and that is where what tends to happen is that you will then present saying that, okay, we were working on a product launch, for example. The launch went very well. These were the things which happened, as planned. These were the things which could not happen on plan, and these things which did not happen on plan because, and then you have some reasons for it in terms of, this was not there, or that was not there, or somebody did not play their part, and things like that. So in most companies, when we look at the process of review, what is happening with that process of review is that the idea the company and your manager would look at is, they want to look at the gap areas so that these can then be improved. Now, these gap areas could be because of resources not being made available. These gap areas could be because of, say, for example, things not being made available in time, resources were not available, or adequate planning was not done. So what they would then want to ensure at some stage would be that if these things are to happen again at some point in time, they would want to make sure that these resources, or additional members, or for example, resources could be different types, like financial resources, things like that, could be made available so that the job and the work which was given can happen as per what the expectation was. So in some cases, what they tend to do is they tend to pick up these areas so that when the same type of thing, which is in the case of product launch, has to be done again, these things could have been, planned in a much better fashion so that it does not have any, embarrassment. How many of you have looked at, did you manage to get the clipping of the Prime Minister making the, closing speech at the conference in Manchester?
No, I didn't see that.
Okay, if you see the news coverage, there's a lot of talk about it, and the press has actually got into, the media and the journalists have actually got into kind of saying she wanted this to be a, what do you call, a kind of a rebalancing speech for her in the party, and make an impact, introduce a lot of changes. But evidently, what tended to happen was that he was coughing, and there was a prank which was played. Somebody ended up giving a P45 saying that Boris Johnson has ensured that you should get your P45, and some of the letters which were on the stage, this is a government which works for everyone, and the letters actually started to come off. So there's a lot of planning which has gone in to do this conference, but when she was making her speech, it was looking like that everything was falling apart on the stage. A prank being played, she actually had a bit of a coughing and fluttering during the speech. Some of the letters at the backstage started to fall off, and this, instead of being, kind of a signature closing speech for the conference, ended up being, the talk of the town in terms of a gaffe, or maybe some sort of a, kind of presented a position that she's in a weak position as against in a strength position or a strong position. So when they look at doing this conference again, some of these things are going to be reviewed. And the reason why they will review some of these things would be that when we are talking of increasing security, there is a prankster who is able to get up to the stage and hand over a P45 to the Prime Minister. So these things will be reviewed because there are gap areas, and these are things which are also taken up in the appraisals, is because you're not just looking at reviewing the performance of the staff or the employees, but you're also looking at picking up on gap areas which could have been streamlined to enable the employees to perform better.
Okay.
The point that I'm trying to make? So
Yeah.
it's a two-way process wherein you're reviewing the performance of the employee, but you're at the same point in time also taking a feedback which allows you to improve overall organizational performance. Okay? when we look at the concept of performance management, now performance management is something which is done for an individual. But when we look at organizational performance management, we are looking at developing, or, kind of closing those gap areas from an organizational point of view so that these things do not happen again. And that also happens within the process of appraisals is because there is a vice versa. So you get feedback from employee, which will be related to the organization, the other members, or whatever it is within the set of the review. And that would be taken as a feedback to improve overall organizational efficiency. Okay?
Okay.
Now, in terms of, let's look at performance appraisal. What are the, when I say performance appraisal, can you think of different types of appraisals which would be classed, or documents essentially, which could be classified as performance appraisal documents? Can you think of any examples? So typically what tends to happen is, let's look at types of performance appraisal documents. How do you review? So if you are going to be reviewing somebody like who works within the organization in the administration department, like a receptionist, the review is not going to be very formal, but the review is going to be very specific to the roles and responsibility that person does on a daily basis. But if you have a review which is happening at a managerial level, then obviously there are things which you'll look at it a bit differently, because there's an agenda which goes out, an appointment or a date is fixed. You'll have at least 2 or 3 persons sitting in that review. You'll have the HR manager, there'll be a note taker or somebody who's taking the notes, and all that process is going to be documented. What I'm trying to say here is the point is that when you look at performance appraisal, then there are different types of appraisal or performance management which can be done depending on the level and the hierarchy or the experience of the employee within the organization. So sometimes you call them reviews because they're happening for a junior member of the staff. You call them performance appraisal because they're happening for management or people in the managerial position. And in some cases, you will also call them something called employee appraisals, because they will happen between the line manager and the staff member, rather than having the head of the department or which is one-on-one, for example, happening between the whole set of organization. And when you look at that, sometimes you will look at that because of the appraisal, the organization also ends up taking a feedback from the employee in terms of what are the key things which the employee wants for him to be or her to be able to work effectively within the organization. And that would mean that at some stage, again, going back to the question of feedback which the employee gives, is then taken on board by the organization to better manage the person. So in this case, an example would be when I look at when you want to improve productivity, sometimes you will see that employees would ask for flexible working hours, right? What they will say in most cases is you will look at people who work on contract or hours contract will want flexibility in terms of working hours. That would say that you're asking me to complete this in 10 hours, but actually this is a 15-hour job or a 20-hour job. So I need more hours to be able to complete this. So there's a bit of a discussion which tends to happen, which will lead to a kind of a manageable outcome. But here you will tend to agree that okay, I need to give more time because of the fact that this job requires potentially more number of hours to be able to complete. So in those cases, what you tend to do is you put some sort of incentive or a bonus scheme wherein you say, okay, if the job is completed in 10 hours, then you get paid this much. But if you try and complete it in say 8 hours, you will get not just the basic, but also you get some incentive or a bonus on top of it because you've managed to close the job early. So sometimes managers will employ these strategies to push the employees to the limit in terms of asking them to do this under pressure. But that would mean there are 2 things which are happening. One, they're able to get the desired output from the employee. And the second is they're able to better manage the employee in terms of the expectations. So what they can do is they can put a reward mechanism in place which will allow them to be rewarded if they finish the job ahead of time, and in some cases penalize them if they are not able to complete the job on time. So these are the strategies you will see that people in the managerial position employ sometimes to get things done, or get jobs done in the right, in the right amount of time, so that there is efficiency and productivity within the organization. Sometimes you will see that the managers will also look at the process of something called self-improvement. And that would mean that they would basically allow the person to do the job in some additional time, or allow them to spend more hours on doing that job, is because they want them to develop that skill set while they are able to complete that particular piece of work. An example here would be that if you know that, say, in an organization, the organization has moved to Windows 10, but after putting in some training and development for all the employees and the migration from Windows 7 to Windows 10, you still feel that there are some users who are struggling with the use of Windows 10 within the organization. Now, there are two ways of looking at it to help improve that situation. One is the manager might push some pieces of work which specifically require you to work on the PC and use the use that particular piece of software, or for you to get hands on and obviously become more efficient. And the other way would be they would sometimes team you up with a particular colleague of yours in the department who is considered to be maybe some sort of a is maybe in a better position and is considered to be some sort of an expert. And when you buddy up with that person or shadow that person, you're able to pick up some of these concepts much quicker rather than going through the stage of learning it and doing it yourself. So managers have that tools in their this is one of the tools in their toolkit to be able to see if there are employees which are struggling. Then they need to kind of put them up in teams, and those the ones that are doing or faring better can actually become mentors or coaches to be able to help develop those skills within their colleagues, or their basically their colleagues within the department. So sometimes you will see these are techniques which managers use to effectively manage people, but this is not a formal performance appraisal. But what they're asking you to do is work with someone for a certain amount of time to be able to pick up those techniques, and those techniques then would help you perform better in your own job. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, one last thing which I want to touch on is in terms of there is a concept of something called self-managed learning. Now, in the last session, I had forwarded a presentation on something called training and development. Now, most organizations, what they are seen to be doing nowadays in the modern concept is that they promote the concept of something called self-managed learning. That means most employees working within a business or an environment or in particular setup have to undergo mandatorily some trainings throughout the year. And these trainings are done, or conducted within the organization, wherein short courses or trainings are done so that the employees are able to develop new skills. What has happened is that it has been realized that apart from doing, review in terms of the work or the output which is required, employers need to be seen to be developing their employees continuously towards the uses of resources like technology, consumption of information, and also effectively managing communication. And in those cases, what tends to happen is most organizations put their employee through some sort of a CPD or something called career professional development. And in this case, nowadays, a lot of companies have something called their intranets. And within the intranets, they have information which the employees can, use. And some of this information is, used to deliver something called training, in-house training courses. And in-house training courses then help the staff to develop skill areas or, gain skills in areas wherein they do not have those skills. Simple trainings which tend to happen could be training like, team leading, negotiation skills, communication skills, telephone etiquettes. Depending on the organization that you work in, you will typically see that most managers would advise their staff to undergo some sort of a training throughout the year. And these trainings could be on soft skills, hard skills, but the reason why these trainings are kind of asked, or employees have to mandatorily get into these trainings or get onto these trainings rather, is because of the fact they want the productivity and efficiency within the organization to improve. They want the individuals to grow. They want the individuals to learn. And this concept, when they promote that you have to spend 2 or 3 days or 20 to 30 CPD hours to train your skill, to train yourself in terms of covering the gap areas, is basically seen to be is basically seen to promote the concept of something called self-improvement. And towards the end, the organization in the annual appraisals, when they measure performance, what they also do is they look at this qualitative factor of what trainings or how many trainings did you attend to kind of improve or build on to certain skills that you need to be able to do in your job. Okay, is that something that you've come across, that your employer asks you to do mandatory trainings across the year, or put aside number of hours, right? So Philip, in the last year, what kind of CPD training or developmental training you have done within your setup in terms of your organization?
We had a new system, like a live database that we set up before. What happened with that old system?
All right.
The people that were in charge of the program, the developers, the contract finished with them, so we had to get a new system by a new developer.
Right. Okay.
Where we could incorporate it. So we all had to buy it, and that new system was mandatory.
Okay.
So we couldn't miss that. So yeah, it was mandatory for everybody that uses that system.
Okay, and anything else in terms of something which is directly related to you, which you had been asked to improve or get on to for example, training?
Yes, yeah. Well, not me alone, but it's for everybody in the department. It's like safeguarding training that we had to go on. So there was safeguarding training and data protection as well.
Data protection as well. Okay, yes. And what about you, Wellington? What about you, Wellington? Are you still there? Did your employer ask you to undergo any trainings in the last year?
Yes, about health and safety. The new system, how to approach the buildings.
That's fine. But in some cases, what tends to happen is you undergo a bit of a refresh. If you have done a health and safety, then you'll be asked to do that training once in 3 years in order to refresh and keep your or skills on that current. So those are things that yes, definitely are looked at. Now, so basically things that we've discussed, in terms of performance management and how performance management is done, what are the objectives. This is something that is basically covered in this presentation. And what we are looking at doing is, the reason we need to understand this is that when we look at doing appraisals, when we look at reviewing performance of staff and employees, we need to be able to understand the tools and techniques available, or at least have the tools and techniques available to be able to do an effective review. And in some cases, it's a carrot and stick approach, which is done in tandem with the HR, wherein if you are reviewing somebody senior in the organization, so for example, the chief executive officers also undergo a review, their performance is also managed because they are given set targets which are both qualitative and quantitative. That means the revenue of the organization will increase, the profitability of the bottom line should increase, the market share target could be that they need to grab market share from competition. But at some stage, the board, the people who are senior to the chief executive, people who sit in the board, maybe the chairman, they are then equipped to do the review or the performance appraisal of that particular person. So this is a structure, this is a process that happens in structure, and it happens for everyone working within the organization. The idea of having this review is to basically link the goals of the organization with the daily tasks of the individual, so that whatever you do on a day in day out basis actually links up at some stage into the overall strategy of what the organization wants to accomplish, on an annual basis or on a long term basis. So that is what is looked at when we do something called performance review. So what I'm going to do is obviously send you these two presentations, and along with that I'm going to send you a bit of a handout for you to read, which is about 3 or 4 pages. And that handout will basically give you the processes through which the performance management is done by people in the managerial position for employees or team members within their team. How do you do an effective review? How do you look at an effective performance appraisal? What are the areas wherein you get feedback and then you pass it on to the management through the routes of performance management? So these are bits and pieces that we have to look at as far as the learning outcome is concerned. And here, sometimes what tends to happen is, if you see the reverse slide, which we need to cover very briefly, would be that sometimes you see when you do performance management, when you do appraisals, when you do feedbacks, they are not taken in the right sense by the individuals. So what you get to see is either there's a backfire which happens, or in some cases the individuals end up leaving the organization because what they feel is that they've given their best, but at the end of the day, the organization has not understood their perspective or they've not been able to perform because they've not been given the right resources or the tools to be able to deliver on that job. So then in those cases, the person leaving goes through the process of an exit interview, but the feedback, which is the exit interview, actually gives feedback to the HR department and the organization to continue this process of organizational development, and that is then reviewed by the board of the company. That why did we have so much of employee turnover? That means we had so many employees leaving the organization because of 1 or 2 specific reasons. And that is what instigates the review happening at the board level for organizational policies and objectives. That were the targets to stretch, were the targets set from a point of view of being realistic, smart, and achievable, or what the adequate resources made available for the individual, the team, or the team members to be able to achieve those targets. So those are all areas that we look at, from a point of view of covering, how we review people within the organization, or how do we manage people through the process of performance management, appraisal, feedback within the organization or the teams that we manage. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Any questions on this, Phil?
No.
What about you, Wellington?
No problem. No question.
Okay, no problem, no question means everything perfect in the assignment. So I should get perfect draft in terms of getting the assignment. Okay, jokes apart, I think some part of the concept within this unit is, HR, because you will need to, when we look at this particular unit, Wellington, just to share that very, very briefly, because Phil is doing level 4 with us as well, and now he's moved on to doing level 5. There are some units in your course as well which seem to link into each other in terms of learning outcomes and the tasks that you need to do. So when you look at the people management, in your case, obviously it's not there because you've probably not done the people in organization at level 4. But some of these units have concepts that you see or that we have understood at level 4, and they need to be implemented. So people management as a unit at level 5 is a combination of organization and behavior. It's a combination of resources management, and it also has some, links in from on the key concepts from managing communication, the unit that you have studied, and that is relevant for level 5. So when you look at things like, motivational theories or topics like motivation, you look at topics flexible work practices, I'm just going through some of the content. So people management strategies, these are more HR related. training and development is HR related, coaching and mentoring is HR related. So when we look at referring to the course material and looking at developing the draft assignment, there are some topics in the book that you will look at will be covered under the human resources management, and there are some topics which will be covered under the other unit, which is to do with organization and behavior. And that is where you tend to see that the material, when we talk about some of the key concepts that we've looked at, would be covered under those headings. Okay.
Yes.
Things like ethical practices, things like corporate social responsibility are more or less a part of not even this unit, but are a part of what you call business strategy in general. So this unit might tie into in your case to the unit which is looking at global business strategy. Philip, in your case 5.2, and then in the case of Wellington, this unit might have some things that you have to dip into looking at managing quality and service. So things like what are the ethical standards of managing quality and service delivery in the health and social care sector. How do managers in the care homes and how do managers in nursing homes look at motivating the staff? Because when you're dealing with people who are physically challenged, how do you keep your staff motivated to be able to do some of these things, or do daily kind of their responsibilities, daily tasks? Leadership theories and management theories are a common theme across some of the units, because they at level 5 are asking you to show the application of leadership and management theories rather than wanting to explain what is leadership theory or types of leadership theories. So here I think in this unit, to try and attempt the assignment, what you're trying to look at is a key concept which I'm just going to bring up on the screen and write it down. Is the concept that when you do this, it is mandatory that you spend on most of the content. So for example, it says explain how organizational structures impact people working in the organization. So when I look at theory on the organizational structure, I would say you would need to put in maybe 20 to 30 words and maybe show one type of structure, which could be a matrix. It could be, say, for example, hierarchical, whichever one structure. So you don't have to go too deep into the theory. The bit that you have to focus on is to focus on application. So what kind of impact does the organizational structure have on the culture of the organization? You have to cover things here like culture, behavior. And here the example would be, say, for example, when I look at US organization or American companies, they tend to have a flat structure. And when they tend to have a flat structure, that means decision making is easier. Management, the lower people working in the lower management, mid-management have access to the top management. And this leads to a positive behavior or development of culture within the organization, wherein they tend to treat most of the employees as equals. There is a differentiation in terms of wages, the roles, responsibilities, the kind of things that you do on a daily basis in terms of managing staff, but the culture is such that there is a culture of openness. So you have to pick up an example here and basically concentrate on application. So application would be, you might have to pick up in the organization and explain why they have that structure, and that structure then gives this kind of advantages or this kind of negatives or drawbacks. So it could be something simple like, if I look at it from a business perspective, you might pick up an organization like Tesco and say that in the structure of the organization, they follow a hierarchical structure because most stores are stores are kind of have a structure wherein there's a hierarchy of somebody being a director, general manager, then assistant managers underneath. You have employees working within the store to be able to do their responsibilities effectively. But when it comes to care home, you will again have the same structure wherein the structure is hierarchical, because you can't expect everyone to do everyone else's job. So here the structure is, you have because you work with a lot of agencies, third-party companies, things like if you have a care home manager for the care home, that manager would have access to doctors or medical staff, nurses, trained staff, which will deal with that particular situation. So you will have to show application in this level, wherein the concepts will have to be very briefly explained, which is to underpin the theory. But in order to underpin the theory, you'll have to give an application or an example to kind of show the knowledge and the understanding of the task which is being asked for when you attempt the assignment. Okay. In a long-winded way, but in a very short summary, it will be that we have to follow something called, a practice here of theory, application, example. Theory is 30 to 50 words. Application, will be picking up an organization, and then within the organization or whichever it is you pick up on that, you have to then relate it, explain a particular example related to the task. Okay, I will at some stage, because looking at a bit of a discussion on the assignment and the structure of the draft, I will send you an extract to look at a particular task for this unit, so that you are clear when you look at attempting it, you are following that through as a model to do the tasks of this assignment. You can present some tasks using a PowerPoint presentation. If I look at, for example, LO1, which talks about organizational structures, instead of describing it in words, my suggestion would be to look at a PowerPoint presentation for this task. You could talk about the different types of structures, maybe show some images, and that would basically say and clearly show that you are understanding the aspect of it. And towards the end of the slides, you can pick up an organization, explain how this particular structure relates to the organization, and then what are the advantages and disadvantages of having that structure within that organization. Is it clear enough?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, good stuff. Any questions that you have, more than welcome on email or phone. I'm going to send copies of these two presentations. Also, they'll be available on Moodle. So please make sure that at some stage you are looking at going through the slides which I put forward, because some of them are from HR, some of them are from organization behavior. So this unit brings at level 5 the benefits of studying both the units together, because when you become a manager or you get into a managerial position, sometimes you have to be a manager and a leader, which is more of OB, and sometimes you have to be a manager which is managing resources, managing people, leading by example, and you are more or less in a mentoring or a coaching role. That is where you step into the role of being an HR manager. You're looking at training and development, you're looking at developing your staff so that your team perform well, you are able to have the output required, and then as a whole, your team output and efficiency and performance goes up. Okay?
Okay.